So the left and the right? We all put ourselves in one of them, but should we? And is it actually reflective of who we are? Or is it something that corporate media is driving at us and on us to make money? It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how in this time of division we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
No, I understand what it's up.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real.
He says your headings. I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car.
Right. Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it. Hey, everybody! Welcome to the show. Happy Tuesday. I'm coming at you. I've been bouncing all over the place, but I've been in Wisconsin, Puerto Rico. I'm back in our virtual studio in Florida. Producer Crafty is in our virtual studio in Los Angeles. I'm in black. He's in white. There's nothing about that other than that nothing is black and white anymore. Going out to you guys everywhere. Crafty, we're good on all our platforms today, right? We're streaming on Reddit, Facebook, maybe TikTok, Twitter, Twitch, you name it. We're out there. We're doing it, and hopefully YouTube, and you guys will hopefully be interacting back and forth with us. I know the show's been down for the last week and a half, so hopefully if you guys forgot, you're coming back, you'll tune in, and if not today, you'll tune in next week. All right, let's jump right in to what is going on. I want to start with what's happening in Texas. If you follow this ongoing, let me start by saying this. Donald Trump is never going to go away. We'll get to that more as the show goes on. Donald Trump's not only himself not going to go away, the media is not going to let Donald Trump go away. The press can't live without Donald Trump. And neither will they let go of anything connected to Donald Trump, whether that's a connection off of COVID, whether that's around the election stuff. Don't get me wrong. I'm not defending Trump here. Trump, his big lie, making up the fact that the election was stolen, all that. We'll talk about that. But the fact that everything seems to be a derivative of Trump. It's like Trump has left the largest imprint of any president since Lincoln. It's pretty scary and sad. Well, maybe it's not. If you're on the right, you might be happy about that. But we'll get to the left-right thing in a minute. I want to talk about what's happening with Texas and the voting law. So Texas is one of 17 states that have passed a number of bills. There's about 28 total bills, which are, depending on which side you're on, either voter restrictive or voter security. Obviously, if you're on the left, it's voter restrictive. If you're on the right, it's voter security. To me, the reality is actually somewhere in between. It's a little bit of both. But what is absolutely clear is that it is being depicted in the media and in the news cycles 100% as a battle over restrictive voting laws. And Texas, in a latest move, is moving to pass a bill. They tried to pass it in May. Texas, the legislature is controlled by Republicans, both houses. Obviously, all 17 states that are doing these laws are controlled by Republicans, thus the restrictive or security, depending on which side you're on. They tried to pass the bill in May, and the Democrats in the House, the Texas House, not the U.S. Congress, basically walked out. So they didn't have enough votes to have a quorum. They didn't have enough votes to pass it. And they did it right before the end of the legislative session. So Republicans couldn't pass the bill. Smart political move by the Democrats. What happened is Governor Abbott, the Texas governor, immediately said, okay, I'm going to hold a special session. I'm going to call everybody back. We're going to do a short special session, and then we'll bring this up again. Well, that's what they did. And this time, as they were getting ready to pass the bill, a huge number of Texas Democratic lawmakers from the House side, the Assembly side, House side, got on two chartered planes and flew to D.C., literally left the state. So again, no quorum. We're gone. We're out of town. And they said we're going to go to lobby Washington about passing. Remember the bill, HR 1, SB 1, the first bill that was going to pass the big, Save America Voting Act, which is literally DOA, like it's done. I mean, they might pass a watered down version, but not happening in the Senate. Well, they're going to go lobby on that. But meanwhile, they've left Texas again. So Texas can't pass the bill. Right? They're going to just keep leaving town and be like, well, we won't be there, so you can never pass it. This raises all kinds of problems, right? Obviously, when half your legislature leaves, you can't do anything, right? You can't pass any bills. You can't do any kind of work. And obviously, a lot of people in Texas are pissed. Probably not just people on the right, people on the left too. And there are other bills and things going on in the Texas legislature other than the voting bill. But that's the number one thing right now. So they fled the state and leaving not enough for people to vote again. So the Senate in Texas passed it because they had enough people there. The Democratic senators didn't want to leave. They look, they're going to get hit for this in their when they have their reelections. But Governor Abbott has said he's going to do it again. He's just going to keep calling legislative sessions until they have to pass it. Meanwhile, they've now passed a bill that allows them to arrest the Texas members of the House of Texas when they come back for not showing up. They'll arrest them. They're going to put them in jail. They're going to put them in the Capitol. They're going to arrest them, put them inside the Capitol, and make them be there to vote. The whole thing is almost comical if it wasn't actually comical. Here's the thing that I want to get to about this, because this is depending on where you are. And this whole thing is about the left and the right, whether the media creates this false narrative. If you look at the media coverage of all these bills is 100%. They are dealing with restrictive voting measures. The media doesn't even pretend to say one side says they're restrictive measures and one side says they're security measures. It's like they are doing this to stop restrictive voting laws. Now, technically, they're right. They technically are Jeff Scott, arrest them all. There we go. Lock him up. Clearly a Trump supporter, right, Jeff Scott? Lock him up. Lock him up. No, listen. I get it. I get the politics of all this. I get how dirty politics has always been and has become, and how divided we are. So understand it. At the end of the day, they're going to lose. Sooner or later, they're going to have to vote on this. It's going to hurt them, I think, probably politically long term. But they're making a bigger play. But here's my point. The coverage of this, almost 100% you would have to, 90% of the coverage, you would think it is 100% restrictive voting laws that they are fighting against. And the truth is, it's somewhere in between. I mean, let me read you what President Biden. So, same time, President Biden just went to Pennsylvania today, and in Philadelphia, gave a big speech about voting rights and voting rights laws. And basically, he said it's the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. And he said it is an assault on democracy, on liberty, and on who we are. Sidebar, I think that's what a lot of Republicans and conservatives were saying about the lockdowns, an assault on democracy, on liberty, and on who we are. But just goes to show you, depending on the issue, it's an assault on democracy, on liberty, and on who we are. Here's an actual quote from Biden. Crafty, can you pop that quote up? "We're facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War," said President Biden. That's not hyperbole. Since the Civil War, the Confederates back then never breached the Capitol as insurrectionists did on January the 6th. I'm not saying this to alarm you. I'm saying this because you should be alarmed. Okay, thanks, Crafty. Now, let me just point out, I'm not saying this to alarm you. I'm saying this because you should be alarmed. It's such like the circular thing, right? I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying this because you should be scared. So you're saying this to scare me. And it's fine. He wants to alarm you. The Confederates didn't attack the Capitol. The insurrectionists did. Right there, I'm going, seriously, again? The 1,000 people who stormed into the Capitol, mostly unarmed. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying it was right. It was illegal, criminal, put them in jail, fine. Was as bad as the Civil War? I mean, seriously? Okay, but let's look at what is the assault on democracy. Because again, I look at these voter laws from both sides, right? Here's essentially what the Texas casino life lessons left or right, D or R matters not. Follow the money to find the truth. Always follow the money. 100% right. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit when I talk about the corporatization of the media and how I think it is creating that. It is a follow the money path. We are put into the little boxes of the left or the right, which again, I'll get to in a couple minutes. But I just want to finish on this voter thing, because here's essentially what Texas is doing, right? The main things Texas is law, and most of these other states that are passing these laws is doing. They are limiting early voting hours, meaning voting before the voting day, right? In Texas's case, they're eliminating drive-through voting, and there'll be no more 24-hour voting before the limited hours, right? They're requiring voter ID to show that you can vote. And in the case of mail-in voting, they're requiring you to have either a driver's license number that you write down or the last 4 digits of your social security number. They also are not allowing officials to send you a ballot if you don't ask for one for mail-in voting. There's a handful of other things too. Are these really the biggest assault on democracy ever? Are these really, Biden called it Jim Crow laws. He compared this to the Jim Crow laws and the KKK's voter suppression. Seriously? Asking people to put a driver's license number down to do a mail-in ballot is equivalent to the Ku Klux Klan's white supremacy suppressionist tactics to prevent all black people, period, from voting because they were black people. It's this is as bad as Jim Crow laws. I'm not saying it's not somewhat restrictive. They are limiting early voting hours. No question. The ID thing's not restrictive. The ID thing is, if you can't convince me people can't show who they are. I keep saying people are like, oh, people can't show their ID. Well, how do they function in life? Seriously. So what? Poor people who live in urban communities don't have IDs? I guess none of them buy liquor. Nobody goes to a bar. Nobody goes anywhere where you'd have to show ID, right? Nobody goes to anything where you have to literally put on ID. Nobody travels. Nobody does anything because no one has IDs. I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke to suggest people can't put down their social security number, don't have a driver's license. Some people don't have driver's license. That's legit. But having some proof of your ID, in many cases, it's even just like a utility bill. It's crazy. But even if it is somewhat restrictive, it's not Jim Crow. It's just not. Do I think some of them are restrictive? Yes. I'm a libertarian. I'm also a big advocate I think we should have, I've said it before, I think we should literally have blockchain voting. We should have a blockchain designed voting system, open source. Everybody can vote from a digital device. It can't be hacked. Everyone can see what happens. I think you should be able to vote 7 days. We should have a 7-day voting period. That's fine with me. I'm all for open early voting. I am not, and it is restrictive that they're trying to prevent that. No question. But voter IDs, not making people ask for a mail-in ballot rather than allowing to send it out, preventing voter harvesting, those aren't restrictive. Those just are sensible. And I'm sick of people acting like they're Jim Crow laws. Even if they are somewhat restrictive in some cases, they're not Jim Crow. They're not KKK white supremacist suppression tactics. They're not even remotely close. And as I've said before, they're not even really aimed at black people, which is what KKK and Jim Crow laws were. They're aimed at Democratic voters and the concentrations of Democratic voters in urban communities who often are minorities. They're after that. They don't care what color you are. If you had an inner city of all poor white people, they wouldn't, who vote Democrat, they'd want those same laws. They'd want those same restrictions. So are the Republicans trying to limit access to some extent? Yes, 100%. And I'm not a fan of it. But is it Jim Crow? Is it KKK? Not even close. Is it the biggest assault on democracy since the Civil War? And as Biden says, worse because the Confederates didn't attack the Capitol? I mean, it's just absurd. But it's the polarizing way we have been led to look at things that triggers this. And it's showing up most in the media's coverage. I want to play 2 little bits from Anderson Cooper. He's with George Conway, Kellyanne Conway's husband, the guy who was the Lincoln Project. And, she was Trump's, top counselor. And just I'll do one at a time. This is Anderson Cooper talking about Trump.
We're keeping him honest tonight in a place we'd frankly rather not be, reporting on things the former president said. It is familiar territory and a familiar dilemma. Debunk it and risk amplifying his lies, or ignore him and risk letting them spread. That's because in what he said at a gathering of conservatives and on Fox News over the weekend, he's opened a new and dangerous chapter in our post-insurrection world. Openly, affectionately almost, embracing the worst attack on democracy by Americans since the Civil War.
Okay, lots to unpack there. Okay, first of all, I love that the media's spin now is Fox News loves to talk about Trump. They always have. CNN loves to talk about Trump. MSNBC loves to talk about Trump. They always have too. They talk about him totally different ways. But Anderson Cooper starts that out saying, we are going to talk about something we don't want to have to talk about. This is kind of like the Biden thing. I'm not saying this to scare you, but you should be scared. It's like, no, you do want to talk about it. No, we don't really want to talk about it. But if we don't talk about it, if we do talk about it, we amplify it. But if we don't talk about it, we risk those lies going unchecked. It's like they can't help themselves. They have to talk about it. Their ratings are going through the floor because they built an entire 4 years on running anti-Trump news, and they need anti-Trump news. They need anti-Republican news. They need something to make people angry. They need to keep the left-right divide going. So it's kind of BS when he's like, we don't want to have to talk about this. They absolutely do want, and if you watch clips of them saying, Don Lemon a couple weeks ago, I don't want to talk about Trump and I'm not going to talk about Trump. And 20 seconds later, he's talking about Trump. It's like they can't help themselves. I don't think it's just a derangement syndrome. I think it is a monetization syndrome. They are making money when they talk about Trump. Their viewers want to see them talk about Trump, so they will keep talking about Trump, but now they have to claim they don't want to talk about Trump, when in fact, they absolutely do. It's great for ratings, and that's what they care about. These are giant corporate media interests aligned with giant corporate advertiser interests who want to not only control the narrative, but their primary goal is to make money. They do not care about you. They do not care about your well-being. They are not progressives. They are not populists. They are self-interested. A great point, Casino Life Lessons. When parents pit their children against each other, children ignore the parents. And I think it's true. And I don't like to think of us as children to the media, but maybe we've let ourselves act too much that way, and it's time we change that. The second part of what Anderson Cooper said that really hit my buttons was when he talks about Trump, going next level lies. I want to be clear. I am not defending Donald Trump. He lied. He created a big giant lie. I don't believe in his heart of hearts or even in his not heart of hearts. He, for a second, believes the election was truly stolen. And if he does, then he's simply self-delusional. The election wasn't stolen. Sorry to everybody out there who wants to say it was. It wasn't. Was there fraud? Absolutely. There always is. Was there more this time? Probably, because they had so much mail-in voting. Was it enough to change the outcome? Don't know. Multiple courts, including the Supreme Court, conservative Republican-led legislatures said no, no, no. It wasn't a stolen election. It was a close election. And Trump has himself to blame for losing it for a lot of things that happened before the election. But that said, it was a close election, and half the country's divided on it. And Trump lied. Trump absolutely lied in saying that the election was rigged and stolen. And he's going to keep lying. I'm not defending that. And Anderson Cooper can call that out. That's fine. But saying that the insurrection was the biggest assault on democracy since the Civil War. And notice now, that's what they said, and that's what Biden said. That's what the news media has been saying. Anderson Cooper added a little line in there. Biggest assault by Americans on democracy since the Civil War. Because they got blown up when they said it, biggest assault on democracy, and Biden said that in his big national speech, right? They got blown up with everybody going, really? So 9/11 was less? So they've now added biggest assault by Americans. But here's where the media divide allows ignorance and allows all of the fact that none of us are historians of everything to get sucked into a giant quicksand pit. Worst attack by Americans on democracy. Let's challenge that. Let's look at that. I did a little research. How about this? 1898, the Wilmington Massacre. Right? That's way back in the day, right after the Civil War, right? White insurrectionists attacked a biracial government, and they killed 60 to 250 black people and knocked 100 black people out of office. That was an attack on democracy. How about the Oklahoma City bombing? Remember that? That was an absolute attack on democracy. Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, they were 100% out to take down, they hated the U.S. government, and they made it clear. 168 people killed when a federal building was bombed. The insurrectionists charging the Capitol, mostly unarmed. The only person who died was Ashley Babbitt. She was one of the people busting in. And the other deaths, by the way, none of them actually happened there, right? A couple of them happened after. The one officer had a stroke later on. Maybe it was from getting worked up at the thing, but it's literally the causal nexus is pretty narrow. Okay. The congressional baseball shooting in 2017, where the guy, James, what's his name? Hodgkinson ran out on the field and made sure they were all Republicans and opened fire and didn't kill anybody, almost killed Congressman Scalise, right? But injured a ton of people, right? Okay, the BLM attacking the Oregon courthouse. I don't think it's the worst attack on democracy ever, but it was an attack on a federal building, right? Okay, but how about this? There have been 3 bombings, actual bombings of the U.S. Capitol by Americans. 3 actual bombings. Did you know that? Yeah. In 1915, July 2nd, a anti-war activist, it was before it was World War I, went in, placed a bomb in the Senate reception room, left and detonated. Now, fortunately, no one was in there, so nobody died. But he actually blew up a bomb inside the Capitol. In 1971, the Weathermen Underground, remember the Weathermen, the like Marxist group? They were all about attacking the state to build a revolutionary mindset, and they were angry about the invasion of Laos, and it was actually kind of like a white working class movement. But they bombed the New York PD headquarters, they bombed the Long Island courthouse, and then they put a bomb inside the Senate, in the Capitol, and they detonated it. Now, they did call ahead so no one would get killed, but they actually blew up the bomb and it caused like $130 million in damage, right? That's an actual bombing of the U.S. Capitol because they were against the U.S. government and wanted to make a statement. There was a bombing in 1983. It was called the May 19th movement, which was this group of it was a feminist movement. And it was May 19th was the birthday of Malcolm X and Ho Chi Minh, the Vietnamese leader, and so they put a bomb inside the Capitol. Okay, 1954, 4 Puerto Rican nationalists. Puerto Ricans been screwed by the U.S. government for 100 years. 4 Puerto Rican nationalists went into the viewing chambers and they opened fire. There were members in session. They wounded 5 congressmen. They literally were inside the Capitol and started shooting at the members and wounded 5 of them. Okay, all of those would qualify to me as bigger assaults on democracy than the 1,000 or so people who charged in with sticks and yelling and screaming and busting windows, in which one person died, one of the people charging in, because she was shot by an armed security or police officer on the inside. Not to mention assaults on democracy, the assassination of President Lincoln, the assassination of William McKinley, both of which were, John Wilkes Booth and McKinley's assassin, were aimed because they wanted to make a statement about overthrowing the U.S. government. How about the attempted assassination of Harry Truman for the same motivation? And how about the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X? Do those not count as bigger assaults on democracy than a handful of people charging into the Capitol? Absolutely they do. And yet, no. The insurrection is the biggest assault on democracy ever. Ever, ever, ever. Bigger than the Civil War. It was just not what used to be since the Civil War. Biden just made it just about as big as the Civil War. It's just absurd that we get stuck in this completely ridiculous extremist narratives. And that's my issue. Not whether the assault on the Capitol on January 6th was okay, but let's put it in perspective, for goodness sakes. Was it bad? Yes. Was it the worst assault on democracy, period, or by Americans? Not even remotely close. And by the way, its impact was tiny. Other than the footage you keep seeing, they were back in session a couple hours later. So clearly didn't have much of an impact, other than the fact that it's been rallied about on and on. And it was a small number of people out of a huge number of protesters who weren't there to attack the Capitol, who were there because they thought the election was unfair. Was that accurate? No. Was that led by Trump and convincing them? To some extent, 100% yes. But they were protesting because they thought democracy was being damaged. Now, was Trump lying about that? Sure. But they weren't out there to overthrow the government. They were protesting perfectly within their rights. The handful that attacked had been planning that attack for months online, and somehow our intelligence services, the FBI, everybody seemed to miss the memo, just like they missed the memo on JFK's assassination, which leads me to wonder, did they miss the memo, or did they not want to read the memo, or did they read the memo and decide, who cares, this will be good for us politically? I know that sounds pretty nefarious, but hey, anything is possible if you're going to be extreme about it. But let's look at how the media covers things, because that's where this left-right divide gets really ugly. So I go back to the Texas thing. I want to show you some headlines. Thanks, Sad Soggy Sandwich. I want to show you some headlines of how the Texas. So if you remember a few years ago, Republicans walked out of their chambers protesting in Ohio, I believe it was. And I'm going to show you headlines, the same headlines from various publications about both events. We're going to go one at a time and go through them. Okay. Sorry, it was Oregon. CNN Politics. This is Oregon. This is in 2019. Oregon Republicans are hiding literally rather than vote on a climate bill. Okay, so that's when the Oregon Republicans went and wouldn't be in session to avoid it. Here's their take on what's happening in Texas. Texas House Democrats leave state to block Republicans from passing voting restrictions. Oh, that sounds pretty good. That's a good thing to do. Leave to prevent them from doing something bad. Republicans hiding. Okay, let's look at the next one, Rolling Stone. It's even better. Or runaway senators, militias, and Koch money. What the hell just happened in Oregon? Versus Texas Democrats to leave state as GOP renews attacks on voting rights. Huh. Same action for different things. Same action. Members decide we won't be here, so you don't have enough votes to have a quorum to pass it. Next headline. Daily Beast. How did the Oregon Republican Party get so crazy? Driven to the fringe. And now Democrats finally step up and smack down Texas Jim Crow law. I mean, you literally couldn't get more extremely different. One, they're so hyper politicized. Bad Republicans leave, don't want to do something good. Good Democrats leave to stop Republicans from doing something horrible. The reality is in between. Both of them are acting somewhat childishly to avoid doing what their job is, which is to debate it out, sit in there, vote, and deal with it. And if you don't get the outcome you want, then elect more people who think the way you do. That's how it's supposed to work. You don't get to just not show up. Democrats or Republicans. I'm not defending Republicans doing it on the climate bill. It's just as sleazy to me. You know, just as bad. But the media's coverage is so extreme. If you didn't know any better, I wouldn't blame anybody for thinking these are restrictive voting laws 100%. And I've acknowledged there are elements of them that are restrictive. There are also elements of them that are security oriented and logical. And some of them mimic things that other states have already done, which are Democrat controlled states. Voter ID requirements again, is not a crazy thing to ask someone to prove who they are. Requiring you to prove who you are when you write in a mail-in ballot is not a bad thing. I filled out my ballot. It was gone in Florida, came back to California. Someone mailed it to me. I came back, dropped it in a box. I could have been anybody. Honestly, anybody could have done that and been me. Anybody could have had that. I didn't get the mail at the place I was at. It was, you know what I'm saying? Could have been anyone. So that's just, again, it's finding a balance. But the problem I have is our divide and how harshly we've been divided. If you ask most people, I don't think most people truly do line up as purely left or purely right. When you look at the common interests we all have, if you did a poll over issues, sure, some would show up. Sure, some things you would find more conservative leaning, but you'd find a lot of people who lean conservative on one thing and not on another. We don't fit into a narrow little box. Most of us, a handful do. The fringe 10% on either side. Most of us are much more complex than that. I'm a perfect example of it. I have friends who are ultra left. I had Nico House on my show a couple weeks ago. Ultra left, hates capitalism, ultra left, biracial guy, ultra left, has an awesome show, huge following. He and I agree on a number of things because we both have a libertarian streak. And believe it or not, he actually doesn't think Trump is as bad as Biden because he thinks Biden was a long-term racist, which he was. The media putting us in these boxes hurts us. Us buying into it, us buying into that narrative keeps us divided. Who wins? Who wins from this false divide? I'm not saying there aren't differences, but the fact that we can't even talk them out, that we can't even negotiate them out, that the media literally, Fox News runs its narrative, CNN and MSNBC run their narrative. They're two totally different stories. You watch this simultaneously, you think you're watching two different worlds. And depending on who their audience is, they nod their heads and go, see. The Fox News crowd, we love it, see. The CNN crowd, see. And it's two totally different stories. Who's winning? Who's benefiting? What's getting done to actually make a change? What's actually working to help the working people of this country? I was on a call with some big progressives today, run a big progressive media organization, and they've been doing it for 30 years. And they were like, they're like, yeah, I don't think most people are left, right like that. They, and they're ultra progressive, ultra left, but they're like, yeah, the divide doesn't really hold up. It's a corporate media driven divide that keeps us polarized. And that polarization hurts us all. I want to get near the end of this, but I want to just show a headline of a story that came up. A New York Times reporter who was knocked out of her job as the freelance editor for the New York Times. Remember, she did the pro-Biden tweet that said she said she got chills. It was Lauren Wolf. She said she got chills when she saw Biden coming off the tarmac. And for that, she was fired. She said, transparency trumps pretending we're not humans with opinions and emotions like everyone else. This is an article she wrote this past week. Thanks, Crafty. And I just want to say on this, I agree with her. And a lot of conservatives jumped on it, was like, see how biased reporters are? Of course they're biased. Every human being is biased. You're biased. I'm biased. Crafty's biased. Every one of us is biased. Reporters are biased. And she's saying, what's wrong with that? Why can't I show my bias? And why can't I be fair at the same time? The second part's more challenging. You can try to be fair, but will you truly be fair? That's hard. But I think some journalists really will try. But denying you even have the bias, pretending you're being objective, the very nature of what you choose to talk about, you choose to cover, how you choose to cover it automatically is a bias. I'm choosing to talk about this and not that is a bias. It's what I think is important. I'm choosing to say these are restrictive voting laws versus voter security laws. It's a bias. Unless I truly just report both sides evenly, which still I will have a bias. She's saying what's wrong with bias? Authenticity, transparency trump everything. That is a rule of media. It's the modern media rule. It's the rule of digital broadcasting, right? Honesty, authenticity, transparency. I'm transparent. I'm authentic. You may agree with me, disagree, but it trumps everything else. Trump, pun not intended. She is right. And I'm sick of journalists acting like they don't have a bias. Have a bias. Own it. Chris Cuomo on CNN, stop pretending you're fair. He can ask great questions, but he asks really hard ones of the side he doesn't like and really easy ones of the side he does. Just admit it. I'm biased. I don't like this side. I do like this side, and I'm not going to be fair about it, but I'm going to try to give you the fairest perspective given my bias. Okay, I buy that. But all of us buying in to pretending that we're not biased, like, no, I'm looking at things objectively. None of us are looking at things objectively. It's almost humanly impossible. And social media is feeding you what you want to see. You know, if you ever watch The Social Dilemma, you can't outsmart the best AI in the world. You know, you think you're smarter than it, but you're not. It's forming those narratives. How do we break it? How do we come together? Well, we start by having real discourse, real conversations, bringing all sides to the table, bringing all voices to the table so that everybody's heard and we have conversations about it. Nothing is banned. No speech can't be allowed, including hate speech. We have the conversations. We force ourselves to talk it out, and then we grow and we stop seeing ourselves left, right in these little boxes and see ourselves as far more complex with far more overlap. And by the way, the average person in this country, I'm a populist. I'm a progressive libertarian populist. I am tired. It's not left and right. It's top and bottom. And the top is winning. That's all I got to say about that for now. It's Rob Nelson Live. Thanks for watching.